Joining me now for the second day in a row, which shows how serious all this is Nick Higham, the author of The Mercenary River, A History of London's Water. And down the line, we're joined by Johnbosco and Nwogbo from We Own It, a campaign group against privatisation. Thanks for joining me, both of you. Why don't we start with Nick, because you were here yesterday, and yesterday you made various predictions, and lo and behold, they pretty much have come to pass.
Yeah, well, the fear yesterday was that Thames Water, which is the biggest water company, might go bust, and today we came a step closer to that because Thames is trying to raise ultimately £3 billion in new money from investors. And its existing shareholders today said they're not prepared to stump up the first 500 million quid of that. Now, that's quite serious,
yes,
because next month Thames has got to repay a loan of £190 million. And without this new money, it's not clear whether they can do that. So there is a risk of Thames going bust. That doesn't mean that the taps in London dry up, because there is something called a special administrative arrangement which applies when water companies get into really serious financial trouble. It is a sort of nationalisation. What it would mean is that the Thames, the operating water company, would be taken into public ownership by Ofwat, the regulator. But it does mean also that the shareholders might lose their entire investments, £5 billion worth of investment they've made in Thames down the years, and they might also be liable for the company's debts.
OK, so I don't understand this. I don't understand how, if you're the shareholders, one of the shareholders, and any minute now you're going to give me the breakdown of just who they are, and people's eyes will roll in their heads, but these shareholders, they know that if this happens, they might forfeit, as you say, that voluminous amount of money, all the money that they put in pretty much. So how can they sit there and allow that to happen? Why don't they stump up at least some of what they've been asked to stump up, just so they don't lose their initial investment?
I think there's a game of chicken going on here. And the question is whether Ofwat, the regulator, blinks before Thames shareholders blink. What they say is that if they put in more money, then they're not going to be allowed to take the dividends, the interest effectively on that investment, which makes it worth their while. Now, you're right. It's a big, big step from saying that to saying we're going to write off our entire investment.
Yes.
So I'm fairly confident,
yes,
human nature being what it is, that one side or the other is going to step back from the brink here. Because there's a lot riding on it for Ofwat as well. The water industry as a whole
yes,
needs enormous amounts of investment to fix all these sewage plants and so on. And if the biggest company goes bust and blames the regulator, who's going to want to invest? Where is that money going to come from?
I don't know. I think people would be kind of quite perplexed and astounded by the idea that water that we kind of think is God-given, we think it comes as part of the planet. We think in the same way that we're entitled to breathe, we're entitled to drink, and water kind of has to be provided to us in the same way that the Almighty lets it trickle down. We see the rain, we see the rivers, we see the sea. We think it's kind of a thing we get. That it's actually investment by this coterie, I'm not going to say rogues gallery, because why would I say that, of private investors who either do or don't deign to provide us with clean, excellent drinking water. It's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it?
I mean, the business of, yes, the water falls from the sky, but the business of making it drinkable and then piping it out to us and storing it and so on, that is hugely, hugely expensive.
Right.
And the really expensive bit at the moment is treating the sewage and stopping that being dumped untreated. Who are the investors? Well, some of them are sovereign wealth funds, countries like Abu Dhabi, but several of them, quite a lot of them, are pension funds. A Canadian pension fund, the university's pension fund in this country, they put their money into water companies because they're supposed to be some of the safest investments going, and the income they get from their investment is what pays their pensions. Yeah. So you have to be careful about demonising shareholders. Some of the water industry shareholders in the past have been absolutely appalling. They have behaved terribly. I'm not sure that's necessarily true of the present set of shareholders in Thames.
Tell me about what has changed, because it makes absolute sense, I think, to everybody that you would put money, had you had any money, into a utilities company, especially water, because we have to have it, we have to drink it, we can't survive without it. What a great and cast iron guaranteed investment to make. It makes absolute sense. But now you're saying that it isn't. It's actually precarious. It's actually teetering on the brink. They might lose everything. How has it gone from a cast iron, excellent golden investment, the most sensible one on earth you could make, to one that's so precarious and so trepidatious that they probably shouldn't have made it?
One of the really big changes has been that interest rates have risen very considerably. When interest rates were effectively very close to, zero, they were very, very low, the water companies borrowed huge amounts of money. And then, which was really, really naughty of them, instead of spending all that borrowed money on improving the pipes and the reservoirs and so on, they gave an awful lot of it, most of it, in fact, in reality, to their shareholders' dividends. Suddenly, the interest rates have gone up. Those loans have become really, really expensive. Thames Water has £18 billion plus of borrowings. I shudder to think what the interest bill on that is. It's absolutely enormous. And suddenly they find they can't pay it.
Let me bring Johnbosco into the conversation now. Your campaign group is called We Own It, but patently, John, you don't, because actually Nick Higham got the list of the people who do. The Chinese government has won all these different pension funds. Abu Dhabi, not you. You don't. Neither do I. We don't own it, do we?
What's quite interesting is that a number of those, I believe the Kuwaiti and the Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth funds are in effect British water publicly owned by foreign governments. So I suppose that's the irony of the system. I did want to start by pointing out that before I came on this call, or before I came on this on the program, I was actually reading an article in The Spectator, which is quite interesting because you would not expect this article that I just read in The Spectator by Ross Clark, who was making the point that it appears that some people have a difficulty accepting that privatization of our public services has been an utter failure for the last 30 years. And I think that what I am beginning to call the Ross Clark test should begin to apply to all public services. And Ross Clark says in this article that if the government will need to step in to save this company if it goes bust, you should not privatize it. And that's what we are seeing with Thames Water at the moment. Thames Water is not supposed to be a business. And it's only in Britain that we actually run water as a business. And even within the United Kingdom, England is quite unique in that respect. Scotland has its water in public ownership. Wales has its water in a kind of quasi-public ownership where it's in a company that's controlled by the government. It makes no sense that it's in private hands. And of course, we're seeing the effect of it. And your other guest has kind of laid out the case against Thames Water, the fact that they've loaded up the company with about £18 billion in debt and sucked out billions, about $7 billion over the lifetime of that of the company in private hands.
All right, let me just bring Nick Higham back into this. Were water to be nationalised, or were the emergency measures to be put into place where there's effectively, as you said, a kind of system, a regime which is sort of nationalisation, or not by that name or whatever it is? Has the government got the money that needs to be put into it?
Well, the long-term nationalisation, I don't think personally is a runner, because it would mean that government would be responsible for making these enormous investments, for fixing the sewage plants and building new reservoirs and all that sort of thing. And, heaven knows, governments, our government, the current government, and any future government, doesn't have that kind of money. It's got many other things that it's going to want to spend the money on. So the argument for keeping it in the private sector and regulating it better, I mean, this is a very good one. The problem is that the privatisation in theory can work, provided you have a regulator which really cracks the whip, really makes sure that the private companies don't abuse their position.
But that's what's so fascinating about this conversation, that Ofwat has been, a toothless shark throughout in allowing this, passively allowing water companies to, if you can milk a water company, hilarious, wrong beverage, but you know what I mean, milk the company, pay huge dividends to their shareholders. Ofwat have been stum and done really very little at all to stop it. And now suddenly there's brinksmanship as Ofwat, the toothless shark, squares up to the shareholders.
Well, they're trying to show some
Well, it's about time, isn't it, for God's sake? All right, Nick, thank you very much. Johnbosco, good to have you on the show.